Okay, so we're still dealing with this question for Gladys Company. This is our standard cost card here with this information for our direct materials, direct wages, variable overheads, standard contribution, and standard selling price. Then we've also been given the actual performance of that year. Okay, we produced 4,850 units valued at this price. We use 2,300 kgs at this price. We paid for labor for 8,500 hours at 67,800, right? And our actual labor hours were 8,000 hours. And the variable overheads amounted to 2,600. So here we're beginning from, we've already looked at these five variances: material price, usage, total material cost, labor rate, and labor efficiency variance. Now we're going to look at these remaining five. So we start with the idle time variance. Okay, so basically, we're just comparing cost of wages paid for the time when workers are not productive. All right, we want to compare. Remember, idle time, it's when workers are just seated and nothing is happening. So it can be the machinery breaks down, so workers can't work. They're just seated in the factory doing nothing. So with these variants, basically, you want it to be as low as possible. You don't want idle time because you're paying workers for nothing. So for idle time variance, it's the hours paid for minus the actual hours worked times the standard rate. All right. The hours that were paid for were 8,500 hours. The actual hours worked were 8,000. So we have 500 hours of overtime, which is a lot. Workers were seated doing nothing for 500 hours. So multiply this by the standard rate. 500 times 8, you get 4,000, which is adverse. Any questions? So this one's like the easiest. You just compare the hours worked, the hours paid for, and just multiply by the standard rate. Then we've got variable overhead expenditure variance. Basically, we're comparing if we spent more or less on the variable overheads. Okay. So again, here it's the standard rate minus the actual rate multiplied by the actual hours worked. So on our variable overhead rate, according to our standard, our cost card, it's 0.3 kwacha per hour. Now we need to get what was our actual rate. So to get our actual rate, you get the total variable overhead cost, which was 2,600, divided by the number of hours worked, 8,000. 2,600 divided by 8,000. So note here for variable overhead expenditure variance, use the hours worked, not paid for. Okay, and the hours worked. So 2,600 minus 8,000, 0.325 per hour. Okay. So it's like the rate we paid was more. All right. So we say standard rate 0.3 minus 0.325, you get a negative number. You get negative 0.025, and multiplied by 8,000, you get negative 240. Okay. So we paid more. Why didn't we use? Oh, here we're focusing on variable overheads, madam. We're saying for variable overheads, it's 0.3 kwacha per hour. This was for labor, this 8 kwacha. Yes. So basically, these are the rates here. Okay, when you see a standard cost card, just remember these numbers at the end, these are the rates. Okay. So if you hear any rate variance, just know you're dealing with this. Okay. Yes. Then we've got our variable overhead efficiency variance. We're comparing if you used more or fewer working hours to make the products. Okay. So since it's efficiency here, so we know we're dealing with the standard rate. Okay. So here we say standard hours minus actual hours times the standard variable overhead rate. Okay. So remember, earlier on, we said to produce 4,850 units. Okay, we took we expected to use 9,700 hours. Okay, but in actuality, we worked 8,000 hours. Remember this 9,700? Let me just I think it was in the other video where we got it. When we look at the labor efficiency variance, when we look at the standard hours minus the actual hours, we say the standard hours for how much we produced, we said since each unit takes 2 hours and we produced 4,850 units, so we expected to use 9,700 hours. But in the question, they told us we actually used 8,000 hours. Okay. So this labor efficiency variance and the variable overhead efficiency variance, they are the same. What's just different is the rates. Here we used the standard labor rate. Here we're using the standard variable overhead rate, but they are similar. Okay. So 9,700 minus 8,000, we get 1,700. Multiply by our standard variable overhead rate. Our standard variable overhead rate, remember, it's 0.3 kwacha. So 1,700 times 0.3, you get 510. Okay, which is favorable because remember, we're expected to work for 9,000. We expected to work for 9,700 hours, but worked for 8,000. So we saved 1,700 hours in time, in terms of hours. We saved 1,700 hours. Okay. And we multiply that by the standard rate, it's like we've saved 510. Watch. Any questions on this one? You'll lose maybe for saying adverse, you lose a mark there, but if you calculate the correct figure, or you are saying if the formula is wrong, you, no, 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 no. If you use, as I said earlier on, if you use it like that, then how you interpret it should also be different. If you use that way and you get a positive and you're still saying favorable, that would be wrong. Because if you use that way where you say actual minus standard, then a positive must be bad, adverse. Then a negative is favorable. Yes. So as I said, if you use that way, it's more confusing now. But if you use this way, just Mhm. Yes. Then we've got sales price variance. Okay. Now remember here for when you hear price variance for sales, okay, it's now actual minus standard. Anything to do with sales and revenue, it's now actual minus standard. Okay. So it's the actual selling price minus the standard selling price times the actual units sold. Okay. So our actual selling price in our question has been given 32 kwacha per unit. Our standard selling price, we have to find out first what was the total cost divided by the number of units. So remember in our information here, these 4,850 units were sold for 150,350. So this was the total revenue. All right. So this total revenue we divide it by 4,850. So we find what was our actual selling price. So 150,350 divided by 4,850, we get 31 kwacha per unit. So we actually sold for less. Okay. We actually sold for less because our standard is 32, but we sold at 31. So you say 31 minus 32, you get a negative value, negative 1. Negative 1 times 4,850, you get negative 4,850, which is adverse. You've made less money. That one kwacha difference has made you lose a 4,850. So here it's actual minus standard. Once you hear this, if it's a sales variance, or any variance to do with sales is now actual minus standard. Any questions? Then we've got sales volume contribution variance. Remember, contribution is contribution to cover fixed costs. Okay. After you deduct your variable cost from your sales, you remain with your contribution. Your contribution is meant to cover your fixed costs, and you are supposed to remain with some leftovers profit. After you cover your fixed costs, there should be some profit left over. Okay. So here is just your actual units minus your budgeted units multiplied by your standard contribution per unit. In the question, they told us we budgeted to make 5,100 units. But in actuality, we made less, 4,850 units. Okay. So you're going to say 4,850 minus 5,100. Our standard contribution per unit was given in the question, 13 kwacha fongwe. So we multiply 4,850 minus 5,100 by 13.4. You get 3,000 negative 3,350, which is also adverse. We did bad. Okay. We expected to produce 5,100 units, but we only produced 4,850. So even our contribution is going to be low. Yes. Any questions?